Alright folks, I'm on Proper Variant and today we have dev diary number 72 for Victoria 3. This one is about the economic law changes in 1.2, but before we jump into this, and this obviously is very important because it goes hand in hand with the now autonomous investment pool, I want to get your attention towards the last paragraph in this dev diary. Let's take a look at it. The question on everyone's mind is, when will you be able to play with these changes and all the other updates and fixes coming in 1.2? Some of these changes are pretty big and we don't want to rush this patch out too early, but at the same time we know that you are anxious to get your hands on it. To find the right balance between these, we've decided to launch patch 1.2 in open beta, which we will talk about more in next week's dev diary. In there, we will also focus a bit more generally on patch 1.2, giving you more of a bird's eye view of what the patch will look like, along with giving you an expected release date. This is obviously a huge paragraph right here. So what does it say? First of all, we will finally learn what is actually in 1.2 next week. We have a rough expectation from the post-release plan. There were words about historicity, so making sure that certain things occur on a more likely basis than they currently do, like let's say the opening of Japan, the Heavenly Kingdom, the American Civil War, the German unification, and so on and so forth. We haven't heard anything about that. Changes to warfare. Big topics saved for 1.2, right? There was a massive thing that was brought up again and again. We haven't heard anything about it. UI rework, UI more friendliness, right? We've only seen, I believe, changes to trade routes. I think that was a Twitter teaser, and that is it. There are so many topics outside of balancing, outside of bug fixing, outside of making sure that the AI is more competitive and whatnot that we haven't heard about at all. So next week we get the release date for the open beta, and we will be seeing the actual sort of bird's eye view. Probably not a changelog, but something fairly close to that, because without a changelog you can't really do an open beta and get valuable feedback. So something in the ballpark, right? The other thing is that we will have an open beta in the first place, and I gotta tell you, it's difficult. It's kind of weird. So I am really unhappy, and I voiced this here, I voiced this on the Discord, I voiced this on Twitter. I'm really unhappy with the post-release patches that we've gotten so far, mostly in terms of balancing and bugs and so on and so forth. Every patch that has been released so far needed a hotfix within a week or two to actually function. And I don't mean to sort of, mush something over to just, get rid of to squish some tiny bugs or whatnot. No, I'm talking, for example, 1.0.4 was really bad. I believe that was the patch number anyway. Really bad about every single country that is AI controlled collapsing in no time whatsoever. Then we had the bug where, for example, capitalists just didn't join any interest groups, making so that your entire trajectory was completely thrown off. The other thing that is still currently active, of course, is the issue with the ports deletion. The post-release patches for Victoria 3 have always had a very sour taste to them. I think that is very fair to say. And that is something that needs to be addressed. Now, I do think an open beta is the right approach here. I want to make a more lengthy video on this in the next couple of days, but I have been thinking a lot lately about how much more important gameplay pacing is for Victoria 3, and how much more important it is to have certain benchmark numbers that you always want to achieve and that are unavoidable, otherwise something will be just running very poorly for Victoria 3 compared to, for example, CK3 or EU4. If in EU4, for example, in a patch like it was in the past, colonization is completely whack, it's completely weird, it doesn't work right, it doesn't really matter for you if you live, let's say, if you play Poland, right? You don't really care for this. Your gameplay isn't impacted there. If in CK3 you're looking at a situation, oh, this building, oh, this man-at-arms is overpowered, it doesn't matter to you. But if the GDP growth is too much or too little in Victoria 3, the entire world market is thrown off. The entire expectation that journal entries, like for example the Springtime of Peoples have, is thrown off, because all of a sudden the loyalist numbers are completely different from what would be necessary to actually activate that journal entry. I hope the open beta will catch most of these things and keep things in a fairly expected way. Let me actually, I'm going to draw something here in Paint. I'm going to put chapters in this video if you want to just, just skip this. But this is very important to me because I think Victoria 3 has been missing the mark so far when it comes to this. So let me just paint something here, right? We're looking at a graph. This is just one of the many numbers that need to be tracked in Victoria 3. Let's say this is your average playthrough, like it just currently happens in 1.1.2, right? This is time right here. This is the bottom axis, time. There you go. Time. I'm a great writer, as you can see. Then we got some years here. The exact years don't really matter. Let's say this is like 1850. Let's say this is like 1900, and this is like 1936. This is definitely not a normal partition here, but doesn't really matter. The point is, this is axis 1, and the axis 2 right here is GDP. When you have a GDP growth in 1.1.2 that lets you experience average things, okay, it would look something like this. You grow, and obviously it's exponential, you go like this. We all know this is the construction singularity right here that you encounter. This is the end of it, right? Where you just can't be stopped. You will just be growing and growing and growing to an insane degree. If you are currently a decent player, and I'm not saying a try-hard player, I'm not saying a min-max player, I'm not saying an amazing player, I'm saying a decent player, you may instead be looking at a curve something like this. And this is a huge issue that should be addressed by having certain expectations, that looking at certain things in open betas and that sort of thing. Let me explain this, right? When you have a journal entry that should pop up around 1840 to 1860, let's say this is like from here to here, and this journal entry is called Springtime of the Peoples, and it is concerned with you fairly, you know, still being fairly conservative, if not reactionary, and your people slowly but surely saying, you know what, this isn't a good idea, I'd like to vote. If you follow the normal curve and your GDP looks like this, right, it's still fairly flat, nobody is in full employment, the wages aren't insanely good, here you will be experiencing this journal entry, and it will make sense for you because your people might actually become angry, they might start political movements, they won't all be loyalists. If you're up here, on the other hand, you will be looking at a situation where Springtime of the Peoples does nothing for you. Because yes, you might now have interest groups that are radicals, and you are not a republic, meaning they are angry, but that is balanced out by you having a +20 because everybody in the interest group is happy, meaning they are also loyal, the interest groups are loyal, the people are loyal, and you do not experience this. This also goes even further, of course, later on, when you have these suffragette movement, right? Or when you have, should be roughly around this same area, when you have the movement around the question of, what's it called? Alcohol prohibition, right? When these things happen, and everybody is loyal because you're somewhere off the damn screen when it comes to the actual GDP performance that you have, which means the standard of living is incredibly high, which means everybody is happy, then these events mean nothing to you. This curve right here, I'll just say it outright, should not be possible. It should not be possible without extreme min-maxing, extreme sort of optimization. I'm coming from this, and I know that this sounds limiting, but I would like to compare it most to the idea of, for example, Hearts of Iron 4. If between 1936 and 1940 I can build up Germany in a way where I am unstoppable, where I do not have any resource shortages, where I have no issues with oil, where I have no issues with overcoming the USSR and, for example, the USA as well, that game doesn't make any sense. Germany in Hearts of Iron 4 has a certain degree of pacing because Germany is saying, I'm looking at a situation where if I don't deal with them in time, USSR will overtake me. The USA will overtake me. What we need to do, and what needs to happen for Victoria 3 very, very urgently, in my opinion, is a benchmark sort of expectation. What I'm describing here, right, when I draw these blue curves, is that anywhere within this blue area, the player can be, and these events will still transpire. Be it Springtime of the Peoples, be it, for example, the Prohibition, be it Suffragette, be it revanchism, if that ever were a topic, be it socialism, right? All of these things would still happen. Socialism, for example, is a really good example. I've played with SMMP, I'm going to cover that as well. A great mod. SMMP makes it so that everybody is poorer, wages are lower, literacy makes people more politically active, and people are generally more interested in pushing their stuff through, whether that is poor laws and so on and so forth. When socialism awakes, right around here, your people are still very, very likely to be poor rather than full employed and incredibly rich, right? And that means they will actually start to pressure you. If you are outside of this blue area, socialism does nothing for you because down here you're already collapsing, you're done, you're toast, right? And up here everybody's happy, nothing concerns you. The open beta, outside of bug fixing, outside of just feedback to mechanics, in my opinion, should make sure that we are always looking at gameplay within this benchmark area, where we can say, our loyalists aren't too extreme, our growth isn't too small, it isn't too big. This should be the generally expected area that a player is in. I'm going to dress this up in a specific video. I'm going to explain this hopefully a bit better. If this didn't really come across for you, then hey, that's fair, because this is just a painting, right? But fundamentally, I welcome the open beta. I just hope, I really hope, that this gameplay pacing is something that we take into account when we look at that patch, because the full release basically have you experienced all of these journal entries. I've experienced them in SMMP. They're really good. I really like them. In vanilla, I would never experience them because everybody's happy starting in around 1860. Anyway, let's proceed by actually jumping into the dev diary. So, open beta aside, my hopes and my fears for it aside, let's talk about what is actually in here. Today we're going to continue talking about patch 1.2 for Victoria 3, namely economic laws and how they changed in 1.2. One of our post-release ambitions is to increase the differences in gameplay between different economic systems. What I mean by that is that there should be deeper mechanical differences between, for example, laissez-faire and command economy, in terms of how they impact your country and the economic decisions you make. All of the existing economic laws have received changes in 1.2, and we've also added a new one, so I'm simply going to go through them one by one and explain how they work now. Before I start, however, I should mention a change that has happened since last week, based on feedback we received on the Autonomous Investment Dev Diary. Several people pointed out that with a weighting system in place, there wasn't really a need for hard restrictions on what the investment pool could fund under autonomous investment. Remember, currently the way it works with a non-autonomous investment pool, if you have, for example, agrarianism, you can only invest in plantations and such. That isn't necessary because the investment pool in agrarianism will largely stem from aristocrats, and the AI that invests that money will lean much more towards these buildings anyway. Sometimes it might build a tools workshop, that sort of thing, but in general, it should be leaning towards everything that empowers aristocrats, which gives the game its own dynamic, and I think is a really interesting idea. Originally, they were playing around with locking PMs behind interest group approval, but they scrapped that because you just adjust production methods so often that it's really cumbersome, and I agree with that for sure. Yeah, obviously that is no longer necessary if it's autonomous and already leans into this direction anyway. If the player can't just steal that money of the aristocrats and invest it in industrialist sort of buildings, then that makes perfect sense, I think. Thus, autonomous investment no longer has any restrictions on what profit-generating buildings can be built, just weighting based on who is investing and what they would want to invest in. As mentioned last week, if you're running agrarianism, expect a lot of farms. The restrictions still apply under directly controlled investment. I will never play with it again, however, and the tooltips will reflect this based on which setting you're using. Traditionalism. Traditionalism in 1.2 is largely the same as before, a very backward system that you should generally be trying to get out of. The main difference from 1.1 is that the investment pool isn't disabled for traditionalism, though you take a hefty penalty to investment efficiency, further reduced if you also have serfdom. Interesting, right? That serfdom now has a bigger impact. Serfdom is not big enough, or rather its impact isn't big enough, I think, as it is in 1.1.2. Though you take a hefty penalty to investment efficiency, and the building types you can construct with the investment pool are highly curtailed if you're playing with directly controlled investment, obviously, right? I'm not gonna be playing with that. I wanna state that as well. Some people have said, oh, why would I play with autonomous investment pool if that means I get the super incompetent AI? Might be true, right? I'm not saying anything, but it puts you more on the curve that I talked about earlier. If you can't take off, and it's not min-maxing, that is just the way the game was designed, right? If you can't take off right away because, well, your aristocrats are like, I would like another banana plantation. A good idea indeed. A good idea indeed. If they're doing that, you are more on the curve that is fairly equivalent to the AI, and they remain more competitive, even if the AI were god awful, right? I hope that makes sense. That is why I will never play without it again, because I think that is the way it is meant to be done. Anyway, right. So this is the changes here. Let's take a look at this. Bureaucracy, population, cost multiplier goes down because there is no big bureaucratic sort of motor or engine working. This is all done via private agreements with the aristocrats and so on. Taxation capacity goes down. Makes perfect sense as well. Private construction allocation plus 25%, so that is fairly limited. But again, if you're not building with your state-owned money, then your construction points can be assigned to the actual people right here, to the aristocrats and so on. Yes, you can subsidize infrastructure and you can subsidize trade centers. You can see that traditionalism isn't all that great. Capitalists are basically giving you nothing. Aristocrats are giving you just a little bit, but you can build with it. This should make traditionalism more competitive while still clearly being worse. I think that is not a bad idea. Requires one of the following, right? So you cannot have per capita taxation proportional, graduated, and you cannot have anarchy. Interesting, yeah, obviously. I think in vanilla, I might be thinking of agrarianism. I believe with agrarianism, you can even have proportional taxation, right? It's really good. I've done it several times. Anyway, interventionism. The golden middle way of economic laws, interventionism, also isn't extensively changed in 1.2 and provides no particular bonuses or penalties, but gives you the freedom to subsidize any and all buildings, as well as extensive options for the investment pool under directly controlled investment, while providing a balanced allocation between private and government construction allocation under autonomous investment right. That's 50%, so it's split, makes perfect sense. You can subsidize all buildings, and the funds can be used. I assume this is direct. Investment pool allocation, yeah. Unlocks government run for railway, right? Disallowed by serfdom and disallowed by anarchy. Fair enough. Agrarianism. Agrarianism has received a fairly substantial boost in 1.2 with both the addition of farmers as an investing pop type and a hefty bonus to the efficiency of all rural investments. Very nice. You shouldn't be able to keep up the same level of technology with other countries that are not backwards facing, that are not reactionary, but you should stay fairly competitive in your overall output, right? And agrarianism now allows this. Capitalists are now also not locked out of investing under agrarianism, though they do so at a penalty, and their building selection is quite limited if you're playing with directly controlled investment. I don't really care about this because, again, I'm not going to play with directly controlled. The rest doesn't seem to have changed here. I like that it has the same construction allocation as interventionism, actually. I think agrarianism makes you quite comfortably competitive now. If I want to play a reactionary Russia, it's always my sort of benchmark, right? How does Russia perform in a mod? How does it perform in vanilla? How does it perform with unbuilds, for example? And I think this is basically lifting up Russia, or the Russia, how I built it in a very reactionary fashion, to SMMP expectations, right? Interesting. Farmers get investment pool bonus, aristocrats get it as well, and capitalists are actually quite decently... Yeah, I think this is a good system. No bonus or malice here to capitalists in interventionism. Interesting. Laissez-faire, the invisible hand of the free market made manifest. Laissez-faire in 1.2 is meant to be the go-to law for the player that wants to get the absolute most out of their investment pool when it comes to industrializing. It does come with significant drawbacks, though, as it is no longer possible to downsize non-government buildings under laissez-faire. Is that a drawback? Where I'm coming from here is, when do you downsize? I mean, obviously, we're building differently if I control it compared to the AI controlling it. At most, it means that... It's interesting. Since you're not subsidizing anything, you can only subsidize infrastructure and trade centers. You're looking at a situation where if in the same state you have a very lucrative building and a not-so-lucrative building, but you want the not-so-lucrative building to be better off, to be fully employed, you can't focus that. Because... very lucrative building will always be more competitive in terms of wage increases. That's interesting. You could downsize the more lucrative building, technically. This is one of the few situations, and I think the situation will become more relevant with the autonomous investment pool, because you no longer define what gets built where, why, and when, right? So this is done by the AI to a large degree. Man, I really want to try this out. I want to see how this performs. My worry is that laissez-faire may be... much like it is in vanilla right now, much better than any other system. In vanilla, let's be really, and with any mods as well that I've played with, laissez-faire is just too good. The investment pool is massive, it allows you to go all out, it's crazy. How it performs compared to, for example, interventionism or agrarianism, yeah, I'd really like to see some comparable numbers there, but that remains to, you know, be seen for the open beta, obviously. Loan interest rate goes down, that is interesting. Private construction allocation, right. Disallow downsizing non-government buildings. Interesting. I really want to see how big, how relevant this actually is. Right. Disallowed by serfdom, isolationism, and anarchy. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Cooperative ownership. A new economic law introduced in 1.2. Cooperative ownership is now a fully fledged economic system instead of just being unlocked by becoming a council republic. Thank God, because I've done those videos about anarchy, about council republic, about, you know, for example, government run. That's a mess. Co-op is so much better in vanilla than anything else, but also in particular than government run. It now being its own system and sort of competing with government run puts it into a different light. Under cooperative ownership, all pops working in a building receive an equal number of shares and aristocrat capitalist jobs are eliminated, meaning no longer are engineers just getting wages. No longer. Okay. But this should lead to a higher standard of living among the workforce. It also means far less money in the investment pool, as farmers and shopkeepers invest far less than their wealthier counterparts under other systems. Farmers and shopkeepers. So, the idea of co-op ownership, much like it is right now, I guess, is that you basically don't have an investment pool. There still is private construction allocation. So this is basically decentralized market socialism, is the idea anyway. But if you really want to go heavy, and if you want to compete with laissez-faire, you probably have to do what you're doing in vanilla right now anyway, which means heavily taxing everybody, because their standard of living is higher, but it goes nowhere except into the pockets of other people that just get more standard of living, unless you tax them, and then you use their construction allocation to massively build up. So, just reading this, I'm not sure that I see a massive change in gameplay style with cooperative ownership compared to how it is right now. Because in both cases, the investment pool becomes basically irrelevant. I mean, here you even have an investment pool, right? In vanilla, you wouldn't really have it, but ultimately, growth in the industry, in both cases, will occur via state construction. You're going towards state construction, right? Let's take a look at the other model for a centralized economy, or rather for a non-capitalist economy, command economy. Command economy is the law that has received the largest and most needed overhaul in, under 1.2. Instead of being a frankly weird system where the bureaucrats own the profits but you're required to subsidize them, and the bureaucrats join the intelligentsia, which hate the dictatorship that you necessarily live in because it's a command economy, meaning it's utterly useless compared to strengthening the trade unions, for example. Yeah, it's a weird system in 1.1.2 right now. That has changed. Command economy now makes use of a new system called government shares, which is used by the government-run ownership production method. Just like how pop shares entitle pops to a portion of a building's dividends, government shares ensure that buildings pay some or all of their profit directly into the treasury. Though in large economies, this is subject to an efficiency modifier, with some of the money being wasted due to the inefficiencies inherent to large, heavily centralized systems. You can see right here, the system is very, very strong, which it got the debuff, I mean, the nerf, via the efficiency modifier. I think this is good. It's realistic, of course. When you don't have a price to determine the optimal allocation of goods, it's very difficult to plan correctly. For example, Eucken wrote about this as well, German economist. Very, very interesting setting right here. It puts this much more to the realistic angle than what we see in the game currently, where it's just unstoppable. I like the system of government shares. I would like to bring this up because these government shares essentially mean that you could also have ownership shares of pops without the pop working in the same building. Think about it this way, right? Let's say we get an investment pool-like structure, but for foreign direct investments. Certain pops, when that money gets invested in buildings in other countries, let's say with that money they build an arms factory, certain pops that live in my country now get ownership shares via... So you have the pool that invests the money, and then that creates in the building shares that bring the profits, the dividends, into a different pool that then gets distributed between all investing pops, right? I think that would be possible. This could easily be used for foreign direct investment, in my opinion, and probably for conglomerate/company-style gameplay as well. Because these shares completely destroy the notion that you need to work in this building, you need to live in the state the building is in, profit off of it. I think it's an interesting idea. I would like to see this pushed further than just the government shares, but this already is way better than what we have in 1.1.2, no doubt about it. Government run is just awful in 1.1.2. Right. Well, this is not something we currently have a setup for in the base game. Government shares can also be freely be mixed up with pop shares, so we're looking forward to seeing what modders make with this. Interesting stuff. Subsidies mandated. Disable investment pool, of course. Right, and you need to requires one of the following. No, so... Another change you might have noticed when looking at the screenshots in this dev diary is that we've tied some economic laws more closely to a country's distribution of power and government principles. Yeah, we saw that above with how much was disallowed and allowed, and here we see it as well. Unlocked by autocracy, unlocked by oligarchy, disallowed by serfdom, disallowed by anarchy. For one, seizing the means of production is no longer a one-step reform into Council Republic, but rather a multi-step reform that involves first implementing a Council Republic, then cooperative ownership, and finally allows you to branch off into anarchism if you so desire. I wonder, what kind of Council Republic are we building if we do Council Republic, but... Wait a minute, is laissez-faire? Does it forbid Council Republic? No, it doesn't. Okay. Huh. A laissez-faire Council Republic. Is that just actual, like, ANCAP? Is that just ANCAP? Huh. Interesting. I'm really curious about the actual gameplay here. Right. Then cooperative ownership, and finally allows you to branch off into anarchism. Command economy now also requires autocracy or oligarchy, as it's difficult to pull off a fully centralized economy without the corresponding amount of centralized powers. The new government shares mechanic should provide more reason to want to keep a grip on power in the late game. Yeah, they are clearly looking at the pacing curve. I just hope that they have this fully in mind. I cannot stop talking about pacing. I need to get that video out. But in general, let's recoup this. I am very positive about the changes made here. I think government run needed an urgent change, and I think the adjustments made in terms of no investment, being disallowed into any sector. It's just naturally weighted with the autonomous investment pool. Very good changes. I would like to see the particular law changes here in action. No idea whether this works, whether it doesn't work. There were some changes where I say like agrarianism, that clearly is a nice buff. I think it works well. Traditionalism as well. On the other hand, cooperative ownership, I'm not sure how much it actually changes gameplay experiences. I'm very curious about this. When it comes to the open beta, I hope that this may be a trendsetter, that maybe we finally see more adjustment towards the curve where the game actually works, rather than I have 2 billion GDP and I'm curious why the game is so easy, right? Not that this is the player's fault, it clearly isn't. It's you broke out of the curve because the game allows it much, much too easily. But I think the open beta is a big project, and I want to see it in action to see whether it's really good for the game or not, right? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think to both these changes, but also the open beta. Next week we will learn more about it. I'll see you then. Later, alligator.